All right, we are live. Welcome to the Conquering Everest podcast. Christina, how are you?
Hey, I'm good.
I always set that 1 minute timer, and so I can check everything and make sure we're streaming, and it catches me every time. That minute goes by so fast. So, all right, I've got this shared out. Hopefully, we'll get some folks joining us that can interact. There's a chat window
Okay,
to
great.
our left. But tell you what, let's go ahead and get started. And if you don't mind, let's just have you introduce yourself to our listeners and or watchers.
All right. So my name is Christina Ray Stanton, and I am originally from Florida, but I've lived up in New York City for almost 30 years. And I am a New York City tour guide. So that's not what brought me up to New York City. I moved up there to be an actress, like
Okay.
a lot of people. And I kind of got lost in my day job, which was a tour guide, and I loved being a tour guide, and I loved being an actress as well. So, but all these years later, I'm still a tour guide, and my husband and I live in the financial district. We've lived there for 21 years, and yeah, so I'm a kind of a New Yorker through and through, I guess, even though I wasn't born and raised there, but I fell in love with the city, and tour guiding kind of helped me, helped along that path of falling in love with this city. So we enjoy ourselves, and my husband works for a nonprofit, and yeah, that's me.
Good deal. And we got to add author to that list, right? Because you've written a couple of books.
Right. Wrote a couple of books. One book was on my experience during 9/11. And we lived right in the neighborhood of the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center complex. And I write from the perspective of a resident of what it was like before, during, and after the attacks. And I've seen some articles written from that perspective, but not a book. So I kind of wanted to add my voice to whatever's out there. And then I also wrote a book about being COVID positive. These are such right?
Yeah.
My next book is actually going to be happy. My next book, which I've already started, is about what I'm like tour guide shenanigans, like funny things happened of all the years I've been a tour guide. I've been a tour guide since 1995. So that one will be fun and funny.
So if I ever I haven't been to New York City. I haven't gone many places on the East Coast. So, but what I'm hearing though is if I do come to New York, I need to make sure I get a hold of you so you can take me around and show me all the ins and outs.
Sure.
So we were going to talk about 9/11 today. It's 20 years.
Yeah.
As you remind, I couldn't believe. I was like, wow, it's already almost been 20 years. And from a perspective of a guy that lives in Illinois. So the day of that event, I worked midnights, and I remember getting home, and I'd always watch a little bit of TV for about an hour or so before I would drift off to sleep. And but that morning, I got home and turned on the TV, and they broke in with the news. And at that point, only one tower had been hit, and they talked about nobody really knew what it was. But as they were talking about it, and they knew it was an aircraft, but they're trying to kind of set the context a little bit. The second plane came in, and it was like, okay, this wasn't an accident. And it really hit me. And it's still, when I think about it today, just everything that I know about it, which is probably just skimming the surface. But it was one of those events that I don't think I'll ever forget. But you were there and you lived through it. And let's talk a little bit about that from your perspective, because I can't imagine what that day was like.
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit earlier than that. So if I became a tour guide in 1995, one of my earlier tours was to give walking tours of the World Trade Center complex. Right. So I was touring the complex years before the attacks happened. So I felt like that was That was just an area I knew so well. I knew a lot, technically about those buildings and about the other buildings that made up the World Trade Center complex. Because again, I'm a tour guide. I was taking people around and telling them what I knew all the time. So when my husband and I moved to the financial district, that was even greater, because I was like, this is awesome, because the World Trade Center complex was actually my favorite area in town, because there's something like it was like a microcosm of New York City, all in one complex, right?
Right.
It like symbolized all of New York City for me. The World Trade Center complex still does, right? And so I was like, this is great. I'm now not only working in the neighborhood by giving tours, but I'm a resident. This is the neighborhood that I live in. So I was thrilled. Also, a silly thing, but underneath the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center complex was the largest, let's say, retail center in Lower Manhattan. So
Really,
I was shopping there all the time. It had over 80 stores. And I mean, it was more than just, let's say, that I think a lot of people, when they think of the World Trade Center complex, they think of the Twin Towers, but so much more than that. Again, it was the Twin Towers. It was the largest, retail center in Lower Manhattan. It had the TKTS booth, which is where I got my Broadway tickets. It was the major transportation hub. So that's where I'd get on and off the subway. That was my local subway stop. So it was kind of everything, to tell you the truth, if you lived down in that area. Right. So it had, restaurants that you would want to go to, bars that you'd want to go to. It was the hot spot of the neighborhood. So that morning, we'd only lived down there just for a few months, right? And we had gotten this wonderful apartment 6 blocks away on the 24th floor. And the best thing about that apartment is it had an outdoor space. It had a 300 square foot terrace that faced the Twin Towers. And if you know much about places, apartments in New York City, outdoor spaces, private outdoor spaces, is a rare thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, I've made it. I really made it. I have this wonderful outdoor space. So it overlooked the Twin Towers. I was just felt like I was on top of the world in that apartment. I was so excited about living there. And so that morning, you're right, I think it was 8:46, the first plane hit the North Tower. And that plane went from north to south. So it actually went into the building, but didn't come out the other side. My husband and I lived just south, so we didn't see any plane or any plane parts. What we saw were flames and smoke coming out of either to the left and right of the Twin Towers. So when my husband shook me awake, I was actually still asleep. He was like, come, something's happened, come to the terrace. So we ran out to the terrace, and it was just this chaotic scene. From the 24th floor, we didn't normally hear street noise, but people were screaming so loud, and there were so many ambulances coming up to go to the Twin Towers, which is again right there, that it was loud. It was such a shock to the senses to see and to hear that noise, to see the smoke. We thought, like you, we didn't know exactly what happened. We thought somebody had brought in a bomb, because understand, I moved to New York City the same year that the 1993 bombing happened at the World Trade Center. Now, I moved 6 months after that. But when I moved there, it was still very much on people's minds. Somebody tried to bring these towers down. Somebody tried to bomb it. So, these years later, that was still kind of the first thing you thought of. It's like somebody tried it again, just like they did before, right before I moved to New York City. And I used to tell people about the 1993 bombing on my tours when I was giving walking tours back then. So, all of a sudden, right over my right-hand shoulder, the second plane came, went right in front of us, turned at like at 8 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and went right into that South Tower. And, the shock waves of that that plane coming in, and we were so close, and that plane was going so fast. You might have even heard they came close to achieving the speed of sound or something like that.
Wow.
So they were out for destruction. It actually blew us back into the apartment and knocked us out. I mean, I came to on the floor. I came to with my dog. We had a 40-pound Boston Terrier, with my dog jumping on my chest when I was on the floor. And my first thought was, why is Gaby jumping on my chest? I mean, I was totally knocked out, totally out of it. I heard my husband yell, Do you want your shoes and all these kind of things? I remember thinking, we just got to get out of here, right? So we grab the dog, go down 24 flights. I get outside and, by that time I kind of collected myself. 24 flights is a lot of flights.
Yeah.
Upstairs, of course. And so I get outside and realize, oops, I'm in my pajamas. I have nightmares about such things. Let me just go back into the apartment. Let's try this again. Let's do this. Let's put on some clothes and collect ourselves. And so, but even in that amount of time, they wouldn't let us back inside. They were like, nope, sorry, Christina and Brian, we have to evacuate. We're just letting people out. Nobody's coming in. So, but I remember going back outside and I was like, no one cares what I wear, what I look like. And I didn't care anymore either. I realized we're in some kind of alternative reality. No one cares. Right. Yeah. So, when you're facing some kind of a dangerous situation, your whole inner alarm, your body alarm just wants you to get as far away from it as possible, right? So for us, the farthest away we could get is Battery Park, right? So if you know anything about the topography of Manhattan, and it's easy to look up, Manhattan is an island, very small island actually. And we were right at the end, right at the tip. And the very last thing before you get to the New York Harbor and the Hudson and the East River is a 25-acre park. And a lot of people are familiar with that park because that's the park you would go into to take the ferries to the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. And some people take the Staten Island ferry. That's where they let off as well. So at any rate, that's as far away as we could get. You see pictures of people walking over the Brooklyn Bridge or walking north through Times Square. But since we were south, we had to go south, if that makes any sense. Well, south was a 25-foot park surrounded by water, right? Made it to this park. We were safe. Okay. We knew it was an attack. None of our cell phones were working. So people would be joining us in Battery Park who had the same idea, getting away, getting to safety. And if they had been watching the TV, they would give us updates. So whoever was coming in, let's say from their apartment, they had been watching TV. So because our cell phones didn't work. So they had the latest news. So somebody had known about the Pentagon, and there was all these rumors, other planes are coming. Oh, a plane hit the United Nations. A plane hit the Times Square. There's a plane headed to the Statue of Liberty. Oh, we totally heard that, right? Which we could see was right there. So we were like, what the hell? I mean, the world is literally coming to an end. And then the ground started shaking, literally started shaking. We thought, my first thought at least was that somehow a plane had run into the earth, the ground, and it was, shaking. The ground was reverberating from this plane coming on. And all of a sudden it kind of hit us all together that, a building's coming down. And no one had thought that. There had not been any scary rumors of all the rumors we were hearing. Because, it was a cesspool of rumors. That was not one rumor that we were hearing, right? So it was a shock to everybody. And then everybody went crazy because everybody knew that if it had fallen lengthwise in any direction, it could have reached the park and it could have killed us. And everybody knew that because, it's right there. I mean, and buildings, they were a quarter mile in the sky. There were 110 floors. There were massive buildings. So if they had pitched over, it could have reached us. So everybody went crazy. I saw people pitch themselves into the New York Harbor, try to swim to Governor's Island. Just kind of all of these crazy scenes that are kind of always going to be in my brain until I die. Right. You can't unsee some of these crazy things that you saw in those circumstances. And so then all of a sudden, this whole cloud of dust and debris covered us in yellow. And actually, I have a picture of it. It's probably going to be hard to show in right here, but I don't. And here's the thing: it's not a good picture, and it doesn't have to be because that's exactly what it looked like. You know what I'm saying?
Just grayed out from the debris, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't see 10 feet ahead of you. It was really, what the effect was like? The effect was like a snow globe. Like you were in some kind of a snow globe. Like the sky, you couldn't see any of that. Everything was yellow. I mean, you open your eyes and kaboom, everything was just flat out yellow. Wow. Then the second one came down, and then what a lot of people are when I tell them this, they seem surprised, but these two buildings coming down, and other buildings were on fire and other buildings came down later, that there was a huge amount of fires going on, which emitted a lot of smoke, which wafted down to us. And again, we are the apex. We're kind of almost in a triangle here, and so everything coming down passed through us, passed over us. And it was almost like wave after wave of just stuff. And we just kept thinking, this is probably going to kill us. No, this is probably going to kill us. If it was not the first building, it's the second building, it's the smoke, it's the debris that we can't breathe, So we just literally were just everybody was running around going nowhere because we were trapped. There was literally nowhere to go, right? So there's for instance, there is a restaurant in Battery Park called Battery Gardens. I heard that I don't think I've ever read it anywhere, but I heard that they broke some of the windows to go in there, thinking that just an interior environment would, have some pockets for people to breathe. I mean, it was a completely desperate situation.
Yeah.
And at one point, my husband and I said goodbye to each other. We just, I remember feeling glad that I was with my husband. We hadn't been married very long. I remember thinking, gosh, I'm so glad that, I met the man of my dreams, or the most wonderful man. And I'm glad I'm with him now, because a lot of people weren't with their kids. They weren't, they couldn't even talk to anybody on their cell phones.
Right.
They weren't with their loved ones. But I was with my loved one, and I knew how lucky I was.
As far as I can imagine and we cut out, I think it was on my end, not your end, but but you were talking about the different fires. So you had the debris and you had the smoke. When you guys felt like this might be it for you, was it just because I imagine you guys couldn't see, you couldn't breathe really very well, or did you just feel like this whole Manhattan is under attack?
Yeah, because we just felt like that the two towers getting hit was just one phase of the attack.
Yeah.
Right. That there was bombs and planes and again, the fact that just from those towers coming down, and we thought a whole bunch of other stuff was going on too, and we could barely outlive that. Each we just felt completely unsafe. And I think that's just how you feel when you're trapped. When you are in a trapped environment, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do. You get to take whatever is coming along your way, right? And so if this is the start of all kind of stuff, there's all these rumors going around, and we can't go anywhere. You're just like, we're kind of sitting ducks. So we just assumed that this is bad enough. This right here might kill us. If there's anything else, we're gone. So we did. We actually said goodbye to each other, and it was a sad moment. And I also remember thinking, I think I was 31 and my husband was 34, if I remember correctly. I remember thinking, I didn't do anything. I mean, I had all these dreams that I wanted for my life, and I had all these hopes, and I wanted this, and I wanted that, and I wanted to do that, and I didn't do anything. It was also really sad. Like, God, that was it. All that for that. It was a lot of sad moments. By the way, I want to show you this. I don't know if you can see, but this is a picture of my husband and I. I only have one picture on our terrace. And I don't know if you can see the Twin Towers here. They were so tall that you actually couldn't fit them in an entire camera shot. So I remember looking out at the Hudson and seeing all these boats coming over. So unbeknownst to me, the Coast Guard knew that there were thousands of us that were trapped, right? They knew that we were trapped, and they issued a call saying anybody who owns a boat, any boat operator, get the boat, take it over to Battery Park. Actually, they had said, come to Governor's Island first. So they were thinking that was going to be the way station where they would send people on their marching orders. But as it turns out, I really think people just for the most part just came straight on to Battery Park and Battery Park City. And so you just start picking people up and dropping off wherever you want to, right? We need all hands on deck. And I read later that there's a lot of boat owners in the New Jersey and New York area, and they all heard this call and they all responded. And 500,000 of us were taken off of Manhattan that day. Now, it's interesting because where we were trapped people who needed to get off for our safety. As the day went on, there was a lot of commuters who come into Manhattan to work, and all of the bridges and tunnels were closed. I think there's 16 of them because they were trying to make sure nobody's coming in with bombs and things like that. Right. All those commuters had nowhere to go. So they started flagging down boats, and they were taken to New Jersey just so they could get home, from there. So, but, so the need base was different, but everybody did need to get off of the island of Manhattan. Right. So we were taken off. We were dropped off in New Jersey. We didn't even know where we were. Again, I'm wearing pajamas. We had our dog. We were completely yellow, completely dust covered. And there were some people who knew that there was a BJ's wholesale club about a mile away. So we walked a mile to the BJ's where I finally got some flip-flops, and I got my first meal of the day, but I think we didn't even get to BJ's until like 1 or 2. Again, completely yellow. I didn't have a purse, but I didn't have anything. I didn't even have my shoes, right? So, that kind of, I just feel like the odyssey for us just continued. I mean, it never got much easier or better, and like on our end, we, the Mayor Giuliani at the time, he actually ordered people to leave Lower Manhattan for many reasons, but it was called they called it the frozen zone, meaning you're not supposed to be in this area. Well, there's a lot of neighborhoods around the World Trade Center complex. So 25,000 of us who live in the area were told we couldn't go back home. So we didn't get back home for 2 more weeks. And we just kind of couch surfed until then. Meanwhile, our dog hovered between life and death. He actually for several months, and he did end up dying of toxin inhalation. Because when an animal gets things on their fur, they lick it off. Right. Well, we were covered with dust and debris. I mean, so now we know what was in that. It was electrical wiring and wood from furniture in the Twin Towers, human remains. Wow. There was, and in our dog's case, a lot of ground up glass, and it actually shredded his insides. So he hovered between life and death for weeks. My husband found out that a fraternity brother from college, he graduated from Clemson, had died. And it just, at one point we were able to get back into our apartment, but we were just like, we were already showing signs of PTSD. Right. Honestly, we rented a car and just drove down to Florida, where I'm from, and got counseling while we were down here and stayed away until January, and we came back. But it was a tough time. Even when we got back in January, where we lived was pretty closed. It was it really wasn't a very livable area. But at any rate, in my book, I talk about, a lot of people think, when they think of the World Trade Center attacks, they think in terms of the planes and the towers, which is certainly the main part of the story. But there was a lot of, let's say, ripple effects from those attacks that I'm not sure the media has talked a lot about the ripple effects. And I just kind of wanted to add, here's a ripple effect from residents. It takes nothing away from the almost 3,000 people who died. It was, it's just another kind of bid to have people like fully understand exactly what that meant, the attacks meant for Manhattan. Because I am, as a tour guide, surprised that people come up to New York City and they're like, why were you affected? You didn't live in the World Trade Center complex. You didn't work in the towers. And I also think that people don't understand how small Manhattan is to know that something like that would affect a huge area. Yeah. So I enjoy kind of, educating people and just helping to complete the picture of the scope of those attacks.
Yeah. You had said that there was a lot of little fires that kind of spread. So I imagine was that some of the community around it then? People lost homes, and did apartments burn, things like that as well? Or
I
Like,
think I need to go back and look at those statistics. I think, was it 9 buildings that came down altogether? The buildings that were really, really hurt was, yes, on the parameters of the World Trade Center complex and within the complex. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize that the fire, they know that they put the last fire out 90 days after, well in December. You know, a lot of people have no clue that happened. But I remember going back into our neighborhood and walking around, and I didn't see one building that wasn't unscathed, that came out okay. I mean, everything was scraped, and the glass lobbies were broken. I remember our local Burger King, they had turned into a temporary police headquarters. And did you know that there was one building that was basically mutilated? The whole middle of it was missing. It didn't even fully come down until 10 years later. They took it down so slowly. There was a big fight about who was supposed to pay for that building coming down. Right. But, it really hurt the area for years. I mean, I was telling you about the World Trade Center complex being a transportation hub. There's one subway that didn't a station, the Cortland station. It didn't even come out till 16 years later. That's how long-standing. They found plane parts just 3 or 4 years ago. Something that was lodged behind a building. So, everything is so close together that it wouldn't surprise me at all to find out they found other plane parts. When they take a building down, they look at it, they find different things. But it was just such a massive amount of destruction. So many acres of destruction.
How long were those that lived there? How long were you guys displaced?
Good question. So right at 11 o'clock that morning on September 11th, Mayor Giuliani said, "Okay, that's it. Everybody out of Lower Manhattan, out." So people left. I heard a couple of hardy people stayed. I don't know how they were able to manage it, because there was electricity down there for forever, and it was. Again, there was nothing open, completely uninhabitable. But how people are. There's always those people who will
don't want to leave. Right.
Yeah. So, but we were told on the 21st that we could get back. So they said, well, the EPA has tested the air, and the air quality is fine, and things have been tested for asbestos, and it's fine. So the 21st, we had my husband's fraternity brother who died. His funeral was the 22nd, the next day. So we already knew that we were going to travel to his. Well, it was actually a memorial service. I think to this day they never did find any of his body. So we went to his memorial service on the 22nd. So it was the 23rd that we came home. So yeah, but even then, I remember going up to our apartment, and it was what I call a yellow wonderland. I mean, It was. You walked in, and there was about 6 inches of dust covering absolutely everything. I remember I'd been reading this book. I remember picking up the book off the coffee table, and it left a perfect book-sized,
it was there,
square or whatever. And it honestly wasn't even livable then. So, I mean, the department did a great job of paying to have people come and clean it up, but the dust was really never ending because it was all kicked up in the air. And then it continued to be kicked up in the air because as they were dismantling the pile, and as they were creating, the new buildings, literally their 24-hour work there, things would waft into the apartment. I'd wake up every single morning. We lived there for 2 more years. Every single morning I woke up, there'd be a whole layer of yellow dust until the day we moved.
Did you guys have medical conditions that came out of, I imagine inhaling all that wasn't good for your bodies.
Right. You're right, because it was, they have, I think, pinpointed over 60 different cancers that toxin inhalation had caused. A lot of it was from, I guess, the amount of ground up concrete actually can spark off a particular kind of cancer. It was the fuel also in the planes, again, electrical wiring, things like that. So right away, I felt I had been a marathon runner. I ran the 96 and 97 marathon, New York City marathons. And right away, I felt like I couldn't run a mile. I was having lung issues. And so I will say that we go to doctors a lot and get tested a lot. And it's one of the reasons why I believe I got a particularly bad case of COVID is because our health has been compromised through the toxin inhalation that kind of carried over to how badly I got COVID. I absolutely believe that they're related. They know that it's related, actually.
Right.
So, but believe it or not, the cancers that are the most common for people who smelled those toxins are skin cancers. Isn't that interesting? You wouldn't necessarily think skin cancers. Prostate cancer. I mean, yeah, there are lung issues like mesothelioma or whatever, but it's not always what you would think of what the toxin inhalation would cause. But we see doctors quite a bit. We're also a member of what they call the World Trade Center Health Registry. So they keep up with our health. So we're constantly filling out forms. They're sending us updates. And, there's some lawyers. There's one main law company that deals with basically getting compensation for those who suffer from cancer from toxin inhalation. I'm on their roster. Thank goodness we don't need them yet. So just like to know that they're there. I mean, you have to have a lawyer to access the 9/11 Twin Towers Compensation Fund. So it's nice to know that they're there. And they've done a great job of taking care of all the people who were exposed, because it was 25,000 residents. I think 50,000 high schoolers and kids. There's a ton of schools in Lower Manhattan. There's employees. Tourists. There's lots of tourists down there. So. And it's not just rescue workers or recovery workers. A lot of people mistakenly believe that they're the only ones who are affected by the toxin inhalation. And certainly they were directly exposed day after day. But, even people who were exposed once or twice, or even on that day, have had issues.
What was so it sounds like it was about 10 days or so, a couple weeks when you guys started to be able to come back home. But what was the atmosphere of Manhattan like for that year that followed? Was there a sense of heightened fear, or was it community?
That's an excellent question. I've actually recently written an article about that, because it was, by that time I had lived in New York, 8 years or what have you. But at any rate, so it really did change Manhattan, New York City in a lot of ways. So when we returned, it was certainly a big funeral. It was a funeral for months and months after. And you got to understand, it was a tough fall. Because I don't know if you remember that the fall and the months after, following 9/11, all these crazy things kept happening. So that we started a war, Operation Enduring Freedom, I think it was called. So we went to war. We Richard Reed, that crazy guy who put a bomb in his shoe and tried to set it off in the airplane. A plane came down. I think it was October 12th, in Queens that killed. I think it was going to Dominican Republic. But it was the largest loss of life in New York State history from a plane accident. What about the anthrax? Remember that whole anthrax scare? Yeah. Sending so it's almost like it just kept going on. The drama and the trauma just wouldn't stop. Especially up in New York. So definitely, people were on such high alert. People were so upset, but I will say from New Yorkers, it definitely created a bonding effect. I mean, really, people were upset for each other. They were upset for strangers. I saw so many strangers hugging in the streets and crying together. And I know this sounds really Pollyanna-ish, but honestly, I never saw it go away. And I contrast that because when I moved to New York, I was, to tell you the truth, kind of struck by how cold people seemed, right?
Yeah.
I remember very well moving there and seeing a larger guy walking down 42nd Street near Bryant Park. Our sidewalks are crazy over there. I mean, if you have to pay attention, right, to not trip, right? He tripped and he hurt himself pretty bad. And I remember I was on the other side of 42nd Street, and that's a busy street. You'd have to go to a crosswalk and then walk over. But I remember looking, nobody came and helped him. I remember looking at the guy, he was wearing a nice suit, and it was all there, that's in the knees. He had scraped it up and it was falling off his, it was just a mess. And I'm telling you, as soon as 9/11 happened and after, if that same guy, if he had fallen down again, I'm telling you, people would have made a beeline to him.
Yeah.
Helped him out. There was just definitely a different sense of caring for your fellow man. Also, too, the city set up a kind of a hotline. They call it a non-emergency hotline. It's 311. You call 311 if you saw kind of a quality of life thing going on that you thought was detrimental to New Yorkers in general. And it's gotten lots of calls. I just feel like there was different things that were put in place that made people feel more accountable for each other. And knowing that if I watch out for you, I'm probably watching out for me too. So ever since 9/11, people really came together in New York City, and I never saw it let up. I really didn't. I still feel like it remains to this day.
How long did it take, as far as businesses, and I don't remember how long it took for things to kind of get back to quote unquote normal. What was that?
Good question. To tell you the truth, things never really skipped a beat below, let's say above 14th Street, right? Okay. Their restaurants were carrying on that day, and never did. Now, Broadway did stop, I think, for like a couple of nights. Some shows did, they were disrupted for 1 or 2 or 3 nights or what have you. But except for Lower Manhattan, it really disrupted Lower Manhattan. Yeah. So Lower Manhattan means, let's say, below Canal Street, and then specifically below Houston Street, and definitely below Chamber Street. Things were really in a mess. So I understand that 100,000 jobs were lost right away. Let's see, how many was it? 18,000 businesses closed and never reopened. So it really messed things up, to tell you the truth, back then. So it took the area a long time to recover.
Yeah, you think, and just trying to see the big picture of that event. I can't even imagine the scope, because you had not only the.
I'm gonna get a cough drop real quick.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
Never cold. Okay, continue.
But I'm just saying that, like, thinking of how wide-reaching that event was, because not only did you have the immediate, the towers and the people in it, and the people close by the city. I mean, but like you said, we went to war, and there's loss of life in the war. It's like, it's just hard to fathom how far out those, just that event reached, and how many lives it either came to an end because of it, or were permanently, not the same. It's just, from an outsider's perspective, I consider myself an outsider because I wasn't in the state. All I saw was what was on TV. It would. You don't think about that. You don't think about the people that were displaced. You don't think about the. Right. I didn't know that. I knew there was like 3 buildings that went down. I didn't know it was like 9. It's like, wow, the impact on life in general of that event, and it's bigger than anybody probably could even imagine.
Again, the ripple effects, really.
Yeah.
just for instance, all those schools that I mentioned, it's getting kids, I think, spent the entire fall not in their own schools. I think different schools, upper Manhattan, shared classrooms and shared spaces, but just the schools alone, just, I mean, again, from the people who live there, the employees to, I mean, a lot of people don't even realize a lot of babies were at nursery schools.
Yeah.
Right. So so all of a sudden the nursery care workers were responsible for all these babies.
Yeah.
Getting them to safety. That's huge. Right. I read this interesting story. And it was a principal on Church Street near World Trade Center. There are 2 charter high schools back to back. And there was a principal who was in charge of 600 students and teachers. So, but when the Twin Towers happened, I mean, one of the plane engines landed on the roof of one of these 2 schools, right?
Wow.
And it was right there, but cell phones weren't working. So she couldn't talk to all the teachers and tell them what to do next. Meanwhile, bodies are falling down. Parts of the buildings were falling down. There was no place to evacuate these kids. All of their normal evacuation procedures were null and void, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't call them anyway. So she was in charge of getting 600 students and teachers to safety. And there was quite a few disabled students, I understand. But she did that. So she got all of them down to Battery Park, and they all did what I did. They all got on boats. You understand, you can't put 600 kids on one boat. So I understand that they even got real creative. They made groups and had the different teachers, responsible for different groups, and got on all these different boats. I understand. I heard a story where one of those groups, the boat dropped them off in Brooklyn near her home, and she brought all these kids, and they all spent the night in her home. Like I've heard. Right. And by the way, that principal did all of that, knowing that her sister was dying in one of the towers, and she did that. So that woman had the presence of mind to take an impossible situation and do what she had to do. And it's a really great story. I know her first name is Ada, which is not very helpful, but it's a famous story. It's easy to Google, but and there's a lot of stories like that of the crazy instances that people found themselves in. And, what do you do when you never expected such a scenario?
And I'm guessing for some of those kids there, if it was that close to the Trade Center, they probably had parents that were in the towers that may or may not have came home.
Right. Exactly.
So here we are going on 20 years later. What are you seeing as far as remembrance? Are you seeing kind of a decline in, because a whole new generation of people are here now, 2 generations. Is it starting to wear off a little bit, or do people still really are they really present day still what's the word I'm looking for, still remembering what is your take being a tour guide on
That's a good question. So pre-pandemic, I felt like the groups were very interested. Students who weren't born yet, the interest remained. Their level of knowledge of what happened was definitely lacking. And I've asked a lot of teachers, who teaches on 9/11, and a lot of them said it's not in the school books. It's essentially taught with what the individual history teacher knows about it.
Right.
But she or he in particular happened to know about it. But there's not a there's not a kind of congruent way to teach that. It's not necessarily taught in history. It's just how much the teacher herself knows of herself or himself knows about it, and what kind of highlights, feature they want to give it. So I definitely, and not to criticize history teachers. It's clear to me though that as time has gone on, because I've been a tour guide again before, right after, and all these years since, that the knowledge of exactly what went on it's getting more and more lacking. People are not, so they know people are interested in it. Yeah. Just the knowledge isn't there. And of course, with the pandemic and all of the drama of this last year and a half, it's very clear that this might not be a very potentially, commemorative 20-year anniversary, because we just kind of all came out of drama. I mean, myself included.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. And then schools, have barely been meeting, or these been all these kind of crazy, people, schools and teachers have done the best they can, but just to get the basics in there, for their students. So schools might have returned to normal at the end, August and September, but it's also coming off of a lot of drama in the year. So I don't know what kind of attention that will be paid to it. In this anniversary. Also, too, tourism is still at a very low ebb in New York City. So I don't think it's going to necessarily attract more tourists to come up, because people are still not traveling, and they're still not coming to New York. I think they anticipated 35 million this year. And they're pre-pandemic, this would have been a 70 million year.
Wow.
We were predicting 70 million to come this year. I think it was 66 million that came in 2019. So at any rate, so I just think with everything that's going on, I think it probably won't get the spotlight that it deserves. But, kind of understandably so.
Yeah, and I guess with time, that's that you come to expect that, because you have a newer generation of folks that are going through their own challenges and tough times. But for those of us that were in our adult years when that happened, I'll never forget it. I know that.
Well, it's still considered the worst terrorist attack in world history.
Yeah.
20 years later, well, it's still very significant. Events in world history.
What? Let's talk a little bit about your website. So, if our listeners or watchers head out to your website, which I have pulled up here, and it's in so ChristinaRayStanton.com. Mm-hmm. Pretty easy to remember, and it should be in the description. What can they expect to find on your website?
So I talk about just a little bit more about my background. I talk more about my books that I've written and what they're about. Also, I am a writer, and I've written a lot of articles about 9/11 and about the coronavirus. So it has a list and links of everything I've ever written and been featured in for 9/11, because I'm a 9/11 speaker. I speak at a lot of schools, and every year I'm asked to speak on Fox and other stations and things like that. So it has all of those links. Also, 9/11 was a visual, like I like myself to show, different pictures and things like that. Right. I have a collection of pictures there that help to tell the story a little better about what happened to us and what the area looked like. And so it's a collection of pictures and articles I've written. And again, it's all in the desire to help educate, because honestly, I don't make a dime off of any of this. My husband and I 4 years ago established a nonprofit, and it helps like kind of general poverty. And so when I wrote the books and even the articles, I had in mind that if I generated any money, that it was one way of funding our nonprofit for some situations that I particularly care about, people who are living in vulnerable places and vulnerable situations, especially, oh my goodness, now during COVID. So many, it made poor areas even poorer. So it's really any money that's ever generated, it goes straight to the nonprofit, which itself goes straight to poverty situations. But at any rate, but yeah, that's what the website is. Just a more of 9/11 and pictures and articles and things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I was checking out the pictures earlier too, and yeah, it's just some of them you look at and you're just like, wow, like the dust and debris. It comes back, because I remember seeing all that on TV, but as time passed,
you might have seen this one. This was our view from our terrace.
Oh, wow! So yeah, you were.
I just loved it, and I love that view too. They were beautiful buildings. I love those buildings. Just love them.
And it's just now they're represented by lights, right? Is that what it is? What's the complex look like now?
So the complex actually, it has a very tall building on it that was supposed to represent one of the buildings. And they have their own observatory, which is, and it's fantastic, by the way. They have, just various, new buildings on the complex. It just looks different, and it incorporates, of course, the memorial. It has, the memorial of the two towers where they originally stood is now a memorial on both sites. It's an acre, so each floor was an acre. So we have a memorial, 2 acres. And then they have a bit of the memorial that is dedicated to people who have died from toxin inhalation called Memorial Glade. And it has, of course, the 9/11 museum. So it has, but that tall building is just another office building, just like the Twin Towers were. They were just normal office buildings. And, like Condé Nast, all the magazine publications, they're in that tall building. And so it's a working, complex, and it's just as beautiful. It's really just as lovely.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to get down there and see it. That's, like I said, I haven't been to the East Coast much, and I think once
when you get there, you have to let me know, and I'll
let you know. I'll keep in touch, because I think, and my kids, my oldest son was. Well, he wasn't even born yet. So yeah, because he was on the way, but he wasn't born. So and I've never thought to sit and talk to them. And my youngest probably has very little knowledge of it. My oldest may have a little more, but definitely something that we need to keep in our minds and think about and reminisce. Especially on the anniversaries. I think what you're doing with the book and tour guides and all that, I think that's a great service, and a lot of people, it's just going to continue to educate and let people know what happened, and then to see the comeback, something so big and deadly that happens, and yet the community, it's still thriving. Everybody's, like I said, there's still I think just having that tall building on that site is kind of like hey, you may have heard us, but you're not scaring us away.
Right, exactly.
So
I think another picture that it paints is just reminding us that with those attacks, we entered an age of terrorism. Yeah. I mean, there were certainly terrorist attacks before them, and but it did usher us into a new age when people take over airplanes and make them missiles. Right. That's where we live now. That's how things go. So I feel like it just ushered us into a new age, and it's just something to keep in mind because it's still going on. Yeah. I mean, all the terrorism that happens in Nigeria, and just there's Al Qaeda still out there. So it's just part of our life and part of our new normal. And it was on in American terms, it hit home. It really did. Yeah. So
yeah, let us know that we weren't we had a risk. We may be maybe the powerhouse country in the world, but we weren't
we're not immune. We're not immune.
So a lot of changes come out of that day. So
right. And I tell people, hey, you don't know that when I was in high school, you could just kind of wander into an airport and
Yeah.
go up to your gate, and your parents would be saying goodbye at the gate. You know,
Right.
now,
Not anymore.
security that we have, and you know, I'll never forget, like in New York, all of a sudden, as soon as attractions started opening again, like the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty, all of a sudden now you have all the checkpoints, so to find out if you're packing heat or anything like that. So you know, just it ushered us into a whole different level of security that we have to have. So
yeah. Well, Christina, it's been great having you on. I appreciate what you're doing to keep the memories alive, and we could probably spend hours and hours. There's so many layers to that, but it was nice having this conversation with you and really kind of hearing it from a perspective of somebody that lived there, in the impact, because that's something that at the time and even since, you get so focused on what happened, which is a big deal. But you forget there's people around that tragedy that impacted lives and changed lives. So it's been nice hearing it from that, because that's something that the media doesn't share with you.
It's true. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate talking. And you're right. I mean, it is important for me to share and to keep the memories alive, because there's 3,000 people would have contributed a lot to the earth and a lot to life, and they're definitely worth remembering, and I strive to do that.
All right, well, hang tight. I'm gonna go ahead and end our live, but we'll have a chat afterwards, so hang tight, and thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.